CEO Millionaire hadn't sang in 12 years until he heard the song of the new secretary. He stepped closer to the door, drawn by invisible threads. Through the glass, he saw her. Burgundy blouse, dark skin glowing under harsh office lights. Eyes closed, lost in song. She moved with unconscious grace, her body swaying to rhythms that seemed to come from someplace deeper than memory. Have you ever heard something so beautiful it physically hurt? A song that reminded you of everything you lost? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. He froze mid-step in his marble lobby, the contract in his hand forgotten, as a voice drifted from the secretary's office, soft, haunting, and impossible. Alexander Price hadn't let music touch his heart in 12 years. But this woman's song cracked something deep inside his chest. What happens when a man who's silenced his soul for 12 years hears the one voice that could destroy him? Have you ever heard something so beautiful it physically hurt? A song that reminded you of everything you lost? This is about more than music. It's about the courage to feel again. But what if that voice belonged to someone who could expose your deepest secret? The 60-floor tower stretched above downtown Dallas like a glass monument to success, its marble lobby echoing with the click of expensive shoes and whispered deals. But that Tuesday morning, one voice cut through the corporate symphony like lightning through storm clouds. Alexander Price owned half the commercial real estate in Dallas. His suits cost more than most people's cars. Board meetings bent to his will. But standing there at 7:43 a.m., listening to someone sing behind closed doors, the CEO felt like a teenage boy discovering music for the first time. His pulse quickened. His throat tightened. 12 years of careful control crumbled as melody wrapped around his ribs and squeezed. The voice belonged to the new secretary, Naomi something. Williams, maybe? He'd barely glanced at her hiring paperwork. Administrative staff came and went. But this woman wasn't just filing documents. She was pouring her soul into every note, transforming his sterile office building into something alive. He stepped closer to the door, drawn by invisible threads. Through the glass, he saw her. Burgundy blouse, dark skin glowing under harsh office lights. Eyes closed, lost in song. She moved with unconscious grace, her body swaying to rhythms that seemed to come from someplace deeper than memory. Alexander's hand trembled against his briefcase. When had he last felt his heart pound for something other than profit margins and hostile takeovers? When had beauty made him breathless instead of suspicious? She was singing an old spiritual, something about finding home. Her voice climbed and fell like water over stones, smooth and natural. No formal training could create that kind of raw emotion. This was pure gift. His chest ached with recognition he didn't want to feel. Music had been his first love, back when Alexander Price was just Alex from Houston, playing guitar in coffee shops and dreaming of stages bigger than his apartment. Before betrayal taught him that beautiful things were weapons disguised as gifts. The song ended. Silence rushed back like cold air. Through the glass, Naomi opened her eyes and saw him watching. Their gazes locked. Something electric passed between them. Recognition, curiosity, danger. She didn't look embarrassed or apologetic. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if asking a question he wasn't ready to answer. Alexander realized he was humming. Actually humming. The melody had crawled into his throat and made itself at home. The first music he'd allowed himself to make in over a decade. Drop a musical note if you've ever had a song completely change your day. Tell me in the comments what voice or melody has ever stopped you in your tracks. As her song ended, Alexander realized he was humming, actually humming, for the first time in over a decade. But when he looked up, Naomi was standing in the doorway, watching him with eyes that seemed to recognize something he thought he'd buried forever. She had the kind of voice that could heal broken hearts or shatter careful lies. And Alexander Price was about to discover which one applied to him. Naomi Williams moved through his executive suite like she belonged there, despite the obvious differences between her thrift store blazer and his custom Italian furniture. When she spoke, Even her regular voice carried melody, each word carefully chosen and perfectly placed. "Mr. Price," she said, extending her hand. "I was just organizing the quarterly reports." Their handshake lasted 3 seconds too long. Her palm was warm, slightly rough from work he couldn't imagine. The scent of her perfume, something floral and clean, mixed with coffee and possibility, making his expensive office feel suddenly intimate. "Do you sing professionally?" he asked, trying to sound casual while his pulse hammered against his collar. "Not anymore," she replied, something flickering across her features like a cloud passing over sun. "Some dreams don't survive real life." "I understand that," he said, more honestly than he'd intended. She studied his face with those intelligent brown eyes, and Alexander felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with clothing. When was the last time someone looked at him and saw past the money, the power, the carefully constructed walls? "You have good acoustics in this building," she said finally. "Sound carries in interesting ways." Was that her polite way of saying she knew he'd been listening? That she was aware of his humming? Heat climbed his neck, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who controlled boardrooms full of sharks. The architect prioritized function over form, he managed. "Sometimes the most beautiful things are accidents," she said, and something in her tone suggested they weren't talking about architecture anymore. She gathered the reports with efficient movements, but Alexander caught her stealing glances at him. The awareness between them was thick as summer air, making every breath deliberate. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" he asked. "New Orleans, originally. My grandmother taught me. She used to say music was the one thing nobody could take from you, no matter how hard they tried." Her voice softened. "Of course, that was before Katrina took everything else." Something cold settled in Alexander's stomach. The last woman who destroyed his trust with music had also talked about Louisiana roots. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Coincidences happened. Not everything was a threat disguised as beauty. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said carefully. "Loss teaches you what matters," she replied. "Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important ones." Their eyes met again, and Alexander felt that dangerous pull, the urge to ask more questions, to know more than was safe. She represented everything he'd taught himself to avoid. Mystery, music, the possibility of caring about something that could hurt him. But standing there in his office, watching her gather papers with graceful efficiency, he realized 12 years of silence had been easier than 5 minutes of wanting to hear her sing again. Have you ever met someone who seemed to understand your pain without you saying a word? React with heart if you believe in instant connections. When she mentioned growing up in New Orleans, something cold settled in Alexander's stomach. The last woman who destroyed his trust with music had also talked about Louisiana roots. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The most dangerous moment isn't when you fall. It's when you realize you want to keep falling, even if it destroys you. Alexander started working late, not for board meetings or international calls, but to catch those stolen moments when Naomi thought she was alone with her music. Each evening around 8, after the rest of the staff went home, her voice would drift through the empty corridors like honey through glass. He told himself it was curiosity, market research, due diligence on his employees. But when Thursday arrived and he found himself choosing his tie based on which color might catch her attention, Alexander knew he was lying to himself. The Dallas skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows as night transformed the office into an intimate concert hall, where two damaged souls circled each other like musicians finding harmony. She knew he was listening. Had to know, because on Thursday night, she chose different songs. Sultrier melodies that made his blood run thick and hot. Her voice caressed each note like a lover's touch, deliberate and knowing. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. The control that made him millions felt suddenly suffocating. From his office, he could see her silhouette moving through the secretarial pool. She'd kicked off her heels, was swaying barefoot on the corporate carpet like it was her private stage. The sight of her uninhibited joy hit him harder than whiskey. Without thinking, he began to hum harmony from his doorway. Soft at first, then stronger as confidence crept back into his unused vocal cords. His voice, rusty from neglect, found the spaces between her notes like water finding cracks in stone. She didn't stop singing. Instead, she adjusted her melody to weave around his harmony, creating something neither could achieve alone. The corporate office became a duet, 12 years of silence broken by one woman's courage and one man's desperate need to remember who he used to be. Her song climbed higher, testing the limits of her range. Alexander followed, his baritone grounding her flights of melody. They were creating music together without sheet music, without rehearsal, without anything but instinct and the electric awareness crackling between them. When the song ended, the silence felt alive with possibility. Alexander found himself standing in her doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled, his guard completely down. She turned to face him, breathing hard from the emotional intensity of their impromptu performance. "I used to sing," he admitted quietly, the words scraping his throat raw, "before I learned that music and trust don't mix." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to smell her skin warm from singing. "What happened?" she asked. The question hung between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he was brave enough to cross. Because answering meant explaining about Jessica, about the betrayal that had silenced him, about the recordings she'd sold and the humiliation that followed. It meant admitting that a woman's cruelty had stolen 12 years of his life. But looking at Naomi, seeing the genuine concern in her expression, Alexander realized that some bridges were worth the risk. What's more intimate, someone seeing your body or someone understanding your soul? Comment below with your thoughts on true vulnerability. When she finished a particularly haunting ballad, she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled, his guard completely down. "I used to sing," he admitted quietly, "before I learned that music and trust don't mix." He opened his mouth to sing for the first time in 12 years, and what came out was more confession than melody. They stood in the empty office, Dallas twinkling 60 floors below, as Alexander's voice cracked through an old song he'd written in college. The notes came out rough, unpracticed, but underneath the rust was something pure and powerful that made Naomi's breath catch. "Don't stop," she whispered when he faltered. "Please." His voice, rough from years of silence, blended with hers like whiskey mixing with honey. Harsh and smooth, broken and whole, creating something neither could achieve alone. She joined him on the chorus, her voice wrapping around as like silk around steel. Their harmony was imperfect but real, the kind of music that comes from shared pain rather than perfect technique. "Her name was Jessica," Alexander said when the song ended, his voice still raw from singing. "We met at UT. I thought she understood my music, my dreams. Turns out she was just collecting ammunition." Naomi sat on the edge of his desk, close enough to touch but giving him space to speak. "I shared everything with her. Private songs I'd written, recordings I'd made late at night when I thought nobody was listening. She said she loved my music, that it was beautiful, that I had real talent." His laugh was bitter. 3 days before graduation, every gossip blog in Austin had my songs. But not just the songs, Jessica's commentary too. How I was naive, how my music was amateur, how I actually believed I could make it as a singer when I was better suited for business. The memory hit him like a physical blow. She sold my dreams for $5,000 and her 15 minutes of fame. Naomi slid off the desk and stepped closer. "Some people collect art or cars," she said softly, "but you collected silence. Why would someone with a voice like yours choose to go mute?" "Because silence was safer," he admitted. "You can't be betrayed by something you never share." Her hand touched his cheek, the gesture so gentle it almost broke him. "That wasn't music's fault," she said. "That was one terrible person's choice. Don't let her steal 12 more years." Something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition, an understanding that ran deeper than attraction. Before either could think or hesitate, his mouth was on hers, desperate and hungry and 12 years overdue. She tasted like possibility. Her lips moved against his with a confidence that made his knees weak. When she pressed closer, her body warm and willing against his. Alexander realized he'd been holding his breath for over a decade. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and necessary. His hands found her waist, her neck, the soft skin behind her ears that made her sigh into his mouth. She tugged at his tie, her fingers working the silk loose as if removing barriers to something inevitable. "Naomi," he breathed against her lips. "I know," she whispered back, understanding passing between them without explanation. They were moving towards something that would change everything, crossing a line from professional to personal to dangerously intimate. But neither pulled away. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you rebuild your ability to be vulnerable? Share your healing journey below. As they pulled apart from their kiss, breathless and shaken, Naomi's phone buzzed with a text. The color drained from her face as she read it. "I have to go," she whispered, grabbing her purse. But Alexander caught a glimpse of the message, and the sender's name made his blood run cold. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, especially when it's wrapped in a melody you thought you'd never hear again. Friday morning came with a distance that felt like winter. Naomi arrived exactly on time, professional smile in place, but something had changed. The woman who'd kissed him with desperate hunger 12 hours earlier now treated him like any other boss. Alexander tried to catch her eye during the morning briefing. She focused on her notepad with laser intensity. When he deliberately walked past her desk, she found urgent filing that required her immediate attention in the storage room. By afternoon, he was climbing the walls of his corner office like a caged animal. But at 6 p.m., when most staff had left, he heard it. Her voice, floating through the building's expensive acoustics. Only this time, she wasn't singing spirituals or love songs. She was humming something that made his blood freeze. It was his mother's lullaby, the one she'd sung to him as a child, the one she'd hummed during her final illness, the melody she'd created just for him, that nobody else should know. The office felt different now, charged with unspoken questions and melodies that carried double meanings. Every song she chose seemed carefully selected, every note a potential clue or weapon. Alexander's hands shook as he approached her workspace. She sat at her desk, organizing files with mechanical precision, but her lips moved silently with a tune that belonged to his deepest memories. "Where did you learn that song?" His voice came out sharper than intended. Naomi looked up, no surprise in her expression, like she'd been waiting for this question. "My grandmother taught me," she said carefully. "She knew lots of old songs." "That's not an old song," Alexander said, stepping closer. "My mother wrote it. For me. When I was 7 and couldn't sleep after my father died." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, recognition, fear. "Maybe it's similar to something your mother's saying," she offered, but her voice lacked conviction. Alexander studied her face, looking for tells he'd learned to read in business negotiations. The slight tension around her eyes, the way her fingers stilled on the papers, the careful control of her breathing. "Naomi Williams," he said slowly. "Is that even your real name?" She stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "I should go. It's late." But as she gathered her purse, Alexander caught sight of something that made his world tilt. A photograph, half hidden in her wallet. 2 women, one older, one young. The young woman was clearly Naomi, but the older woman, his mother's face stared back at him for Naomi's wallet. "Who are you?" he whispered. Their eyes met across 6 feet of expensive carpet and 12 years of carefully constructed lies. In that moment, Alexander realized that their meeting wasn't coincidence. Her job application, her placement in his building, her late-night singing that had drawn him like a moth to flame. None of it was accident. The woman whose voice had awakened his sleeping soul was connected to his past in ways he couldn't yet understand. And from the fear in her eyes, he could tell the truth was going to hurt them both. When someone seems too perfect for you, do you trust it or question it? Have you ever sabotaged something good because you were afraid? Let me know your thoughts. He confronted her after hours, voice shaking with betrayal and desire. "Who are you really, Naomi Williams? And why are you singing my mother's songs?" Her answer would either save them both or destroy the fragile harmony they'd built. She stood in his office at midnight, tears streaming down her face, about to reveal a truth that would change everything, including whether he could ever trust his heart again. "My real name is Naomi Williams," she said, voice breaking like glass. "But my mother was Clara Jefferson, your mother's best friend, the woman who held her hand when she died." Alexander's world tilted. Clara Jefferson. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. His mother had talked about Clara constantly during those final months. The friend from nursing school who'd moved to New Orleans, who'd promised to visit but never made it before cancer won the race. She came for the funeral. Naomi continued, tears making tracks down her cheeks. "You were so lost in grief, you probably don't remember her. But she remembered everything. Every story your mother told about you. Every song she sang. Every lullaby she wrote." The office shrank around them, 60 floors above Dallas, but the city below felt as distant as another planet. They were just two people whose mothers had shared secrets, whose broken hearts somehow beat in rhythm. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Because you would have seen me as charity," she said. Another person who pitted the poor CEO who stopped singing. "I needed this job. My mother's medical bills from Katrina, the treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. I couldn't afford for you to reject me out of some misguided sense of honor." Alexander sank into his chair, the expensive leather suddenly feeling like quicksand. "So everything between us, the singing, the late nights, the kiss, it was all planned?" "No." The word exploded from her with such force that he actually believed it. "The job was planned. Taking care of my mother was planned. But falling for you? Wanting you? That was never supposed to happen." She moved closer, desperation making her brave. "My mother told me about a little boy in Houston who sang like an angel. She made me promise to find you someday, to remind you that music was your gift, not your curse. But she never said you'd be, what? Beautiful," she whispered, inside and out. "She never warned me that helping you remember who you used to be would make me forget who I was supposed to be." The honesty in her voice broke something loose in his chest. Alexander stood, closing the distance between them in 3 steps. When he reached for her, she didn't pull away. "Your mother was with mine when she wrote those lullabies," Naomi said as his hands framed her face. "She learned them to pass down the musical legacy your mother feared would die with your silence. She made me memorize every note, every word, because she believed someday you'd need them back." Their lips met with desperate intensity, 12 years of silence crashing against 27 years of waiting to find him. This kiss was different, raw, honest, stripped of pretense and professional boundaries. Her mouth opened under his, welcoming the invasion of his tongue as her fingers worked frantically at his shirt buttons. He lifted her onto his desk, scattering quarterly reports and merger documents. Her skirt rode up as she wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer with a hunger that matched his own. "I'm sorry," she gasped between kisses. "I'm so sorry I lied. Don't apologize for bringing my mother's music back to me," he said against her throat. "Don't apologize for making me remember who I used to be. Would you forgive someone for lying to you if their lie was actually an act of love? When does deception become protection? Share your perspective below." As they lay entwined on his office couch, both emotionally and physically exposed, his phone rang. The caller ID made them both freeze. It was his ex-girlfriend, the one who destroyed his music 12 years ago. And she was calling from New Orleans. The woman who broke him was on her way to Dallas, and the woman who might heal him was considering running again. "Jessica." Alexander's voice came out strangled as he answered the call, his free arm still wrapped around Naomi's naked form. "Hello, Alex." That voice, sweet as poison, familiar as his own reflection. "I heard through the grapevine that you're making music again, with some secretary from New Orleans." How quaint. Naomi went rigid against his chest. Even through the phone, Jessica's contempt was thick enough to taste. "What do you want?" Alexander asked, though he already knew. Jessica only called when she needed something, money, connections, or the chance to twist the knife she'd left in his back. "I'm in Dallas on business," she purred. "Thought we should catch up. For old time's sake." The line went dead. Alexander stared at his phone like it might bite him. "She's coming here," Naomi said, already pulling away, reaching for her scattered clothes. "Your ex-girlfriend, the one who destroyed your music." Naomi wait, but she was already dressing with mechanical efficiency, her face closed off in a way that made his chest tight with panic. "I should go," she said, not meeting his eyes. "This was a mistake. Getting involved with my boss, mixing personal with professional, it's exactly the kind of thing that destroys people like me." "People like you?" She whirled to face him, eyes blazing. "Black women who work twice as hard for half the recognition, who can't afford to be seen as anything other than completely professional, who definitely can't afford to be caught half-naked in their boss's office when his ex-girlfriend decides to make trouble." The raw pain in her voice hit him harder than any accusation. Because she was right. In his world of corporate sharks and gossip-hungry media, their relationship would be dissected, judged, used as ammunition against both of them. "Don't run," he said quietly. "Please." "Running's the only thing I know how to do perfectly," she replied, buttoning her blouse with shaking fingers. "Until today, when staying hurt more than leaving." The Texas heat shimmered off downtown pavement as two women circled each other in Alexander's world, one representing his painful past, the other his uncertain future. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He paced his penthouse, replaying every moment with Naomi, every word Jessica had spoken. By 3 a.m., he was standing at his piano, the expensive Steinway he'd bought as a monument to dreams he'd abandoned. His fingers found the keys without conscious thought. The melody that emerged was broken, halting 12 years of rust fighting against muscle memory. But underneath the hesitation was something pure and desperate, a song about second chances and the courage to trust again. 60 floors below, Naomi stood in her small apartment, suitcase open on her bed. 2 hours of packing, and she still couldn't make herself zip it closed. Every time she reached for the zipper, she heard Alexander's voice singing harmony to her melody, felt his hands gentle on her face, remembered the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of convenient. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend in New Orleans. "Girl, you better not be running again. Some bridges are worth burning, but some are worth building." Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for love? What would you do if your past threatened your future? Tell me below. As Naomi packed her apartment, ready to leave Dallas forever, she heard something that made her drop everything. Alexander's voice, full and strong, singing from the courtyard below. He was performing her song, the one she'd written for him, letting the whole neighborhood hear what he'd kept silent for 12 years. He sang her song under her window like a man with nothing left to lose, because sometimes the only way to save love is to risk everything. Alexander's voice carried through the Dallas night air, rough around the edges but pure at its core. He'd dragged his guitar down from the penthouse, plugging into a small amp in the courtyard of Naomi's apartment complex like some lovesick teenager. But this wasn't teenage infatuation. This was a 40-year-old man choosing courage over comfort, music over silence, love over fear. Neighbors appeared on balconies, drawn by the impossible sight of Dallas's most powerful serenading a woman in Building C. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, sleeves rolled up against the humid air. "Naomi," he sang, her name becoming melody. "Don't run from what we could be." 6 floors above, she pressed her face to the window, suitcase forgotten. The man who hadn't performed in public for 12 years was risking his reputation, his image, everything he'd built to prove that she mattered more than his fears. The song she'd written for him, about finding your voice again, about trusting someone with your broken pieces, filled the courtyard with hope and desperation. By the second verse, other voices joined in. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2B hummed along. The college kids from the first floor started clapping. A community that barely knew each other was united by the raw honesty of a millionaire's public confession of love. The courtyard filled with neighbors drawn by the impossible sound of a millionaire serenading his secretary like a lovesick teenager, his voice rusty but real, his heart finally louder than his fears. When the last note faded, silence stretched between them. Alexander looked up at her window, guitar still in his hands, waiting for her answer. Naomi's door slammed open. She ran down 6 flights of stairs, barefoot in her pajamas, not caring who saw or what they thought. By the time she reached the courtyard, tears were streaming down her face. "You beautiful idiot," she laughed, throwing herself into his arms. "Do you know what you just did? Do you know how many people probably recorded that?" "I hope they all did," he said, spinning her around as scattered applause broke out from the watching balconies. "I want the whole world to know that Naomi Williams makes me brave." Their kiss was desperate, relieved, full of promises neither had dared make before. She tasted like tears and toothpaste and coming home. He tasted like courage and second chances. "I wrote you something," she whispered against his lips. "A real song. About us." "Sing it," he demanded. So there in the courtyard, surrounded by curious neighbors and smartphone cameras, they performed their first official duet. Her voice soaring, his providing the deep foundation that made her flights of melody possible. They harmonized like they'd been doing it for years instead of days, creating something neither could achieve alone. Someone started the video that would be trending on social media by morning, Dallas CEO's Midnight Serenade. The footage was shaky, the audio imperfect, but the emotion was undeniable. 2 people choosing love over fear, music over silence, each other over safety. By morning, they were viral. But Alexander didn't care about the headlines or the board's inevitable questions. He cared about the woman in his arms who'd taught him that some risks were worth taking. When was the last time someone fought for you publicly? Have you ever had to choose between your reputation and your happiness? React below. Just as they defeated one threat to their relationship, Naomi's phone rang with news that changed everything. Her estranged father, who'd abandoned her family before Katrina, was coming to Dallas with lawyers and a claim that could destroy everything they were building. The father who abandoned her during her darkest hour returned just as she'd found her light, and he wanted to take credit for the song. Naomi Jefferson Williams. The voice on the phone made her blood turn to ice water. "My daughter, my musical prodigy, Marcus Jefferson, the man who'd walked out when she was 12, who'd missed every birthday, every graduation, every moment that mattered. Now that she was viral on social media, performing duets with Dallas's most eligible bachelor, suddenly she was his daughter again. "What do you want?" she asked, Alexander's arm tightening protectively around her waist. "To reconnect with my baby girl," Marcus said, his politician's voice smooth as oil. "And to discuss the songs you've been performing. The ones I taught you. The ones that legally belong to me." The courtyard, which moments before had felt like the center of their love story, now felt exposed and vulnerable. Alexander could hear every word through the phone speaker, watched Naomi's face crumble with old pain. "You didn't teach me anything," she said, but her voice lacked its usual strength. "Oh, baby girl, that's where you're wrong. Check your birth certificate. Check the copyrights on those old spirituals your grandmother sang. I filed the paperwork years ago, when I thought your voice might amount to something." Alexander grabbed the phone. "Who is this?" "Alexander Price, I presume. The man corrupting my daughter with your money and influence. I'm Marcus Jefferson, Louisiana State Senator, and Naomi's legal guardian in all matters musical until she turns 30. She's 27, Alexander said. Marcus's laugh was cold. "Exactly, which means every song she's performed, every video that's gone viral, every penny of profit, it all belongs to me. Louisiana law is very clear about parental rights to artistic works." Naomi sank onto the courtyard bench, the fight draining out of her like water from a broken cup. "He's not lying," she whispered. "He filed papers when I was 16, after I won a local singing contest. Said it was to protect me. To protect my investment," Marcus corrected. "And now that investment is paying off. I'll be in Dallas tomorrow with my legal team. We have a lot to discuss." The line went dead. Alexander knelt in front of Naomi, taking her hands. "He can't do this. There have to be laws." "He's a senator," she said hollowly. "He knows exactly what laws exist and how to use them. This is what I get for believing good things could happen to people like me. People like you? Black women from broken families who think they can have fairy tale endings with white billionaires. The world doesn't work that way, Alexander. It never has. The law office felt sterile and cold, all marble and mahogany. But when Naomi sang a few bars of her original composition to prove ownership, the room transformed into a concert hall of truth. 24 hours later, they sat across from Marcus Jefferson and his team of lawyers in downtown Dallas's most expensive legal conference room. Marcus was exactly what Alexander had expected, silver-haired, expensively dressed, radiating the kind of charm that concealed a complete lack of conscience. My daughter has always been talented, Marcus told the mediator. I invested in her training, her development. Protected her interests when she was too young to understand their value. You invested nothing, Naomi said quietly. You left when Hurricane Katrina hit. When we lost everything. When I needed you most. Temporary setback. Marcus waved dismissively. I was building my political career to better provide for you. Alexander watched his legal team work, using every connection and resource at his disposal. But Louisiana law was complicated, and Marcus had covered his bases well. How do you handle family members who only appear when you're successful? Have you had to choose between blood family and chosen family? Share your experience. When the judge ruled in Naomi's favor, her father stormed out with a threat that chilled them both. You think you know her story? Ask her about the real reason she left New Orleans. Ask her about the fire. Some secrets burn everything they touch, including the person trying to keep them buried. They drove back to Alexander's penthouse in silence, Marcus's parting words hanging between them like smoke. Naomi stared out the window at Dallas traffic, her victory against her father's legal claims feeling hollow against the weight of what she still hadn't told Alexander. The fire, even thinking about it, made her hands shake. Rain hammered against the windows of his penthouse as she told him about the night New Orleans burned. Not from Katrina, but from her past mistakes and one tragic moment that changed everything. His name was Deshaun, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. We've been together since high school. He was charming at first. Made me feel special, chosen. But charm can hide a lot of ugly. Alexander poured her a glass of wine, then thought better of it and made her tea instead. Something warm and comforting for a story that was clearly neither. It started small, she continued. Criticism of my singing, my dreams of making it professionally. Then criticism of my clothes, my friends, my family. By the time he started hitting me, I'd already lost so much of myself that it felt normal. The rain outside seemed to intensify, as if the weather was responding to her pain. The night it happened, I'd gotten accepted to a music program at Tulane. Full scholarship. My ticket out. When I told him, he lost it completely. Said I wasn't going anywhere, that I belonged to him. Alexander's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. I tried to leave, pack my bags while he was at work. But he came home early, saw the suitcases, saw the acceptance letter. The fight was the worst one yet. Her voice broke completely then. Alexander moved to sit beside her on the couch, pulling her into his arms. He grabbed my guitar, she whispered into his chest. The one my grandmother had given me. Started smashing it against the wall. I tried to stop him. We struggled, and she pulled back to look at him, needing him to see her face when she said the words that had haunted her for 8 years. The guitar hit the space heater. Old wiring, dry wood, everything went up so fast. Deshaun, he got trapped in the bedroom when part of the ceiling came down. I tried to get to him, but the fire was too strong. Tears ran down her face like the rain on the windows. He died because of me, because I tried to leave, because I fought back. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. He died because he was abusing you, because he destroyed your property and tried to control your life. The fire was accidental, Naomi. You were defending yourself. Tell that to his family, she said bitterly. Tell that to the news reports that made me sound like a murderer. Tell that to the reason I had to change my name and leave Louisiana. Is that why you came to Dallas? To hide. To survive, she corrected. But also because my mother made me promise to find you. She said healing comes in different forms. And sometimes helping someone else find their voice helps you forgive yourself for the times you couldn't find yours. Their lovemaking that night was different, tender, healing, desperate in a way that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with two damaged souls choosing to trust each other with their broken pieces. He moved over her with reverence, touching her like she was something precious instead of something guilty. When she cried during their joining, he kissed away her tears and whispered promises against her skin. "You're not responsible for what happened to him," he told her afterward as they lay tangled together. "You're responsible for surviving it, for becoming the woman who saved my music, who brought light back into my world." Have you ever carried guilt for something that wasn't really your fault? How do you heal from trauma when others judge you? Let me know below. As they held each other, both finally free of their secrets, Alexander's business partner called with news that would test everything they built. A major record label had heard their courtyard performance and wanted to offer them a contract, together. Success has a way of complicating everything, especially when you're not sure you deserve it. The recording studio hummed with expensive equipment and nervous energy as Dallas's most unlikely musical duo prepared to lay down tracks that could change everything. Platinum albums lined the walls like promises, and the mixing board looked like it could launch a spaceship. Alexander adjusted his headphones for the third time, his hands shaking slightly. 12 years of silence, and now a room full of industry professionals waited to judge whether his voice was worth the gamble. "You ready for this?" Naomi asked through the studio glass, her own nerves showing in the way she kept fidgeting with her jewelry. The producer, a heavy-set man named Rick, who'd worked with everyone from Beyoncé to Blake Shelton, leaned into his microphone. "Let's start with the ballad you two wrote together, the one from the courtyard video." Their voices blended more perfectly than ever, creating something neither could achieve alone. Alexander's deep baritone provided the foundation, while Naomi's soprano soared above, their harmonies weaving together like two rivers joining to become something stronger. Between takes, they found themselves stealing moments of intimacy. His hand on the small of her back as she adjusted her microphone stand, her fingers brushing his as they shared sheet music. The sexual tension that had always existed between them only intensified in the closed space of the recording booth. "Take 5, Rick called after their third attempt at the bridge. "You're both thinking too hard. Music this honest doesn't come from your heads. It comes from somewhere deeper." In the hallway, Alexander pressed Naomi against the wall, his mouth finding hers with desperate hunger. The stress of performing, the weight of expectations, the fear of failing again, all of it channeled into the way his hands tangled in her hair, the way she arched against him. "We're really doing this," she whispered against his lips. "Making an album together." "Are you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But the good kind of scared. The kind that means you're doing something that matters." Back in the studio, something had shifted. Their voices found each other with new confidence, their harmonies becoming conversation, argument, seduction, and resolution all wrapped in melody. Rick nodded approvingly from behind the glass. "That's it. That's the magic we're looking for." But success came with complications. Alexander's board of directors called an emergency meeting, questioning his priorities and his judgment. Naomi's extended family in New Orleans suddenly wanted to reconnect, drawn by the smell of potential money. The business world that had made Alexander millions was suddenly suspicious of his musical aspirations. Stock prices fluctuated based on entertainment blog speculation. Shareholders worried that their CEO was having a midlife crisis that would cost them profits. "They're saying you've lost focus," his business partner David warned over drinks. "That this music thing is a distraction from what really matters." "Maybe what I thought mattered isn't what actually matters," Alexander replied, surprising himself with his certainty. Meanwhile, Naomi faced different pressures. Her success meant scrutiny of her past, questions about her relationship with Alexander, speculation about her motives. "Gold digger," some blogs called her. "Opportunist." The secretary who seduced her boss into making her famous. The word stung, but not as much as they would have before Alexander. Because now she had someone who knew her truth, who'd chosen her despite her secrets, who saw her worth even when the world tried to reduce her to stereotypes. Would you risk a stable career for a chance at your dream? How do you balance security with passion? Tell me your thoughts below. Their first single was climbing the charts when entertainment reporters uncovered Naomi's connection to the New Orleans fire. The headlines were brutal, and by morning, their record label was threatening to drop them. Fame can either build you up or tear you apart, and sometimes it does both at the same time. The headlines screamed across every entertainment blog and tabloid. Dallas CEO's girlfriend. Secret killer. From fire to fortune. The dark past of music's newest star. Did Naomi Williams murder her way to the top? Alexander's phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters, board members, and crisis management firms. Naomi sat in his penthouse, watching her past weaponized against their future, feeling like that scared 20-year-old girl all over again. The label wants to meet, Alexander said, hanging up from his third call of the morning. Emergency session. They're talking about pulling our contract. Maybe they should, Naomi said quietly, staring out at Dallas, sprawling below. Maybe I'm too damaged for this world. Too much baggage for someone like you. Don't you dare, Alexander said fiercely, kneeling beside her chair. Don't let them make you smaller, because they can't handle your truth. The press conference room buzzed with hostile energy until they began to sing. Then silence fell like a curtain, as if the entire world stopped to listen to truth set to melody. They decided to control their own narrative. Instead of hiding or making excuses, they called their own press conference. No prepared statements, no lawyers, just two people and their music. We're not here to defend ourselves, Alexander began, his hand finding Naomi's for strength. We're here to tell our story, the real one. Naomi stepped to the microphone, her voice steady despite the cameras flashing like lightning. 8 years ago, I survived domestic violence. The man who abused me died in a fire that was accidental, tragic, and not my fault. I've carried guilt and shame about that night ever since. Reporters started shouting questions, but Alexander held up his hand. Let her finish. I came to Dallas to rebuild my life and to honor a promise I made to my dying mother, Naomi continued. I never planned to fall in love. I never planned to make music again. But sometimes life gives you second chances when you least expect them. Then they sang, right there in the press conference. Without instruments or backup, they performed the song they'd written about surviving trauma and finding love. Alexander's voice, strong and clear, supporting Naomi's soaring melody as she turned her pain into something beautiful. By the time the last note faded, half the room was in tears. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support from domestic violence survivors sharing their own stories. Other celebrities came forward with their own struggles, using the hashtag Second Chance Voices. Their song about surviving trauma and finding love became an anthem for others with difficult pasts. Download radio stations that had dropped their single added it back to rotation with increased frequency. But the real victory came that night, alone in Alexander's penthouse. They made love with the desperate intensity of two people who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Every touch was a celebration. Every kiss a claim on the future they were building together. No matter what happens with the music, Alexander murmured against her skin, you saved me. You brought my voice back. We saved each other, she corrected, her body arching beneath his as he moved inside her with tender possession. Outside, Dallas glittered like scattered diamonds, but inside they created their own constellation of hope and healing. Have you ever had your personal business become public? How do you stay true to yourself when everyone has an opinion? Share your experience. Just as public opinion began turning in their favor, Alexander received a call that made his blood run cold. His ex-girlfriend was back, threatening to release a recording that could destroy everything they'd built. Sometimes the most important performance of your life happens when everything you've built is about to crumble. Jessica stood in Alexander's office like a ghost made flesh, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She'd aged well, Alexander noticed clinically, but there was something hollow behind her green eyes that hadn't been there in college. "Hello, Alex," she purred, settling into the chair across from his desk like she owned the place. "Congratulations on your newfound fame. Though I have to say, the company you're keeping these days is interesting. What do you want, Jessica?" She pulled out her phone, finger hovering over the play button. "Remember our last night together in Austin? The fight we had when you found out about the blog posts? You said some very unflattering things about your little secretary's predecessor." Alexander's blood went cold. He remembered that night. The rage, the betrayal, the things he'd said in anger that he'd regretted for 12 years. "You recorded that?" "I recorded everything, darling, including your rather colorful opinions about black women, poor people, and what you thought their place in the world should be. Imagine how that would sound now, played alongside your touching love story." The threat was clear. Those words, taken out of context and twisted by a master manipulator, could destroy not just his relationship with Naomi, but everything they'd built together. "How much?" he asked quietly. "Oh, this isn't about money," Jessica laughed. "This is about you remembering who you really are, who you belong with. Leave the charity case, come back to me, and these recordings disappear forever." Alexander looked out his office window at Dallas, at the city where he'd built his empire and found his heart. Then he thought about Naomi, probably at home preparing for tonight's concert, trusting him to protect what they'd created together. "No," he said simply. Jessica's perfect composure cracked. "Excuse me." "I said no. Release the recordings. Destroy my reputation. I don't care anymore. You're bluffing. 12 years ago, you taught me that some people will use anything against you. But Naomi taught me something better, that love is stronger than fear. So do your worst, Jessica. I'm done being afraid of you." The Dallas concert hall filled with supporters and skeptics alike. But on stage, there was only music, truth, and two voices that had found perfect harmony despite imperfect lives. That night's performance was electric. Word had spread about Jessica's threats, and the audience came expecting drama. Instead, they got raw honesty and incredible music. "Some of you came here tonight wondering if the man standing before you is the same person from those recordings you might hear tomorrow," Alexander said into the microphone. "The answer is yes and no. Yes, I was angry and stupid and said things I regret. No, I'm not that man anymore. Love changes you. Truth changes you. And the woman beside me changed me in ways I'm still discovering." He turned to Naomi, seeing his whole future in her eyes. "I've been silent for 12 years because I was afraid of being hurt again. Tonight, I want to be loud about what matters." They performed their hearts out, every song a conversation between two souls who'd found their harmony. The audience sang along, swayed together, became part of something bigger than entertainment. During the final song, Alexander dropped to one knee on stage, pulling out a ring that caught the stage lights like captured stars. The audience roared, but all he heard was Naomi's sharp intake of breath. "Naomi Williams," he sang instead of speaking, "will you marry me?" Her yes came out as melody, her tears catching the lights as she sang her acceptance back to him. The crowd exploded, but they only heard each other. What would you do if you had one chance to prove who you really are? When has authenticity been more powerful than perfection in your life? As the applause thundered around them, Alexander dropped to one knee on stage, pulling out a ring that caught the stage lights like captured stars. He proposed not with words, but with a song he'd written just for her, 12 years of silence finally breaking into harmony. The ring sparkled under the stage lights as Alexander's voice filled the concert hall, strong and sure, singing the proposal he'd written in secret over the past month. Every word was crafted specifically for Naomi, every note chosen to match the melody of her heartbeat. "You taught me that silence isn't safety," he sang, his eyes never leaving her face. "You showed me that love isn't betrayal. Will you write the next verse of our story with me?" Naomi's tears fell freely as she sang her yes back to him, their voices weaving together in perfect harmony while 3,000 people witnessed the moment their separate melodies became one song. The stage lights created a golden circle around them as he slipped the ring on her finger, a vintage piece he'd found in New Orleans, crafted by a local artist who specialized in music-inspired jewelry. The band was carved with tiny musical notes, their initials hidden in the composition. Backstage after the show, they celebrated with champagne and desperate kisses, their engagement still feeling surreal and perfect and terrifying all at once. "The label wants to fast-track our album," Alexander murmured against her neck as she pressed close to him in the dressing room. "Strike while we're hot," they said. "And Jessica?" Naomi asked. "Released the recordings this morning," he said, surprising her with his calm tone. Turns out 12-year-old angry words from a bitter man aren't as damaging as current actions from a loving one. The blogs are calling it a desperate attempt by a jealous ex. Their lovemaking that night was different, celebratory, claiming, full of promises for the future they were building together. Every touch was a vow, every kiss a seal on their commitment to weather whatever storms came next. 6 months later, their wedding planning was in full swing. They'd chosen a venue overlooking downtown Dallas, the same skyline where their love story had begun, but the ceremony would feature their original music throughout. "I want our guests to hear our story," Naomi explained to the wedding planner. "Not just witness our vows, but understand the journey that brought us here." Their album, Hidden Melodies, debuted at number 3 on the Billboard charts. More importantly, it sparked conversations about second chances, surviving trauma, and the healing power of authentic love. They established a foundation using music therapy to help trauma survivors find their voices. The first location was in New Orleans, in Naomi's old neighborhood, offering free sessions to anyone who needed healing through song. "My mother would have loved this," Naomi said as they toured the completed facility. "She always believed music could heal anything if you let it." Alexander watched her interact with their first group of participants, mostly women, many survivors of domestic violence, all looking for ways to reclaim their power through art. "You're going to change lives here," he told her later. "We're going to change lives," she corrected. "That's what partnerships are for." The man who'd been silent for 12 years now spent his days helping others find their voices. The woman who'd carried guilt and shame had transformed them into strength and purpose. What's the most romantic proposal you've seen or experienced? How do you know when someone is truly the one? Share your love stories below. 6 months later, as she walked down the aisle to a song they'd written together, she felt a familiar flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with wedding nerves. The woman who'd awakened his voice was about to give it an entirely new reason to sing. The wedding venue overlooked downtown Dallas, where their love story began, but now the city skyline witnessed not just a ceremony, but the birth of a legacy that would help others find their voices too. Naomi walked down the aisle to Our Beginning, the song they'd co-written about two broken people choosing to heal together. Alexander sang it live as she approached, his voice strong and clear, no longer hiding the gift that had brought them together. She was radiant in cream silk that flowed like music-made fabric, her grandmother's pearls at her throat, her smile brighter than all the lights of Dallas combined. But what made Alexander's breath catch wasn't her beauty. It was the secret she carried, the flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with wedding nerves. "Before we exchange vows," Naomi said when they reached the altar, "I have something to tell you, something that gives our promises even deeper meaning." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach, watching understanding dawn in his eyes. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered just for him. Alexander's knees nearly gave out. The man who'd spent 12 years in silence now found himself speechless for entirely different reasons. Joy, terror, overwhelming love, all of it crashed over him as he realized the woman he'd just married was carrying their child. Their kiss sealed more than their marriage. It sealed the promise of a family built on truth, music, and the courage to love despite past pain. The reception featured their Music Foundation's first benefit concert. Survivors from their programs performed alongside established artists, creating a night where healing and celebration intertwined like harmony and melody. "Speech," someone called as the evening wound down. Alexander stood, pulling Naomi up beside him, his hand protective over the baby she carried. "A year ago, I was a man who'd forgotten how to sing," he began. "I'd let fear silence me for 12 years. Then this woman walked in my office and reminded me that some things are worth the risk of being heard." Naomi took the microphone. "We started as broken people who'd lost our voices to trauma and betrayal. But we learned that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about transforming it into strength. Our foundation exists because we believe everyone deserves a second chance to find their voice," Alexander continued. "Whether that's through music, through love, or through the courage to trust again." Later that night, in their honeymoon suite, they made love with the tender intensity of two people who'd fought for their happiness and won. Alexander's hands were reverent on her body, worshipful of the life growing inside her, the future they were creating together. "Sing to our baby," Naomi whispered as they lay tangled in expensive sheets, the Dallas lights twinkling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. So Alexander sang lullabies, some his mother had written, some Naomi's grandmother had taught her, some they were creating together in that moment. His voice, once silenced by betrayal, now promised their unborn child a world where music was safe, where love was honest, where voices mattered. The man who'd refused to sing for 12 years now had the most important audience of his life, listening from inside his wife's womb. Full circle, from silence to song, from fear to love, from broken individuals to a family built on harmony and hope. So what would you do if someone helped you find your voice again after years of silence? Would you use that gift to help others? Let me know in the comments what you'd do with a second chance at your dreams. If this story of finding your voice through love touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about real love, second chances, and the courage to sing your truth. Comment below, what would you risk for love? And remember, your voice matters, your story matters. And sometimes the most beautiful songs come from the deepest pain.